Hey there, and welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The NTIA has received over 235 applications totaling about $5.5 billion for the Middle Mile Grant Program. Be right back. Hey, thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Broadband Deployment News. So as I mentioned, the NTIA has received over 235 applications for the Broadband Middle Mile Grant Program. So this is a program designed to connect unserved and underserved areas, not through the last mile to the end consumer, but really helping to connect the networks, the last mile networks, to the middle mile network that then will connect lots of other networks. So this was a separate program under the IIJA, separate from the BEAD program, and some of these funds are going to be available sooner. So I just want to talk about this a little bit today. So you see here, this is the press release from the Broadband USA or the NTIA site. Again, more than 235 applications submitted to the Biden-Harris administration's Internet for All Middle Mile Grant Program. So it's funny how many names they have for this now. So it used to be the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That was kind of changed to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Then there's little acronyms under that law, but they also call everything kind of Internet for All. So that came out later to give it another little marketing spin. The Department of Commerce's NTIA announced today preliminary data that showed over 235 applications were submitted, totaling more than $5.5 billion in funding requests for the Enabling Middle Mile Infrastructure Grant Program. That's the official name of the program. Middle Mile Grant Program provides $1 billion in funding to projects that connect high-speed internet networks to each other and reduces the cost of bringing internet service to communities that lack it. So as you can see, they've received over 5 times the money that's actually in here. So obviously some people are not going to be getting money through this program. However, the BEAD program, which is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, which is primarily aimed at providing last mile network connection, awards can actually be made for middle mile in that program, because there are going to be some, and that money goes through the states, there are going to be some states that have more middle mile infrastructure that they need maybe than last mile infrastructure. You know, one example might be somebody like Alaska. They're going to need both, but they're going to have a lot of middle mile infrastructure that they need as well, due to the size of the state, how many unserved and underserved remote areas there are. So they're going to be able to probably get additional money. I'm sure they're probably going to get a lot of money through this program as well, because again, they have some serious needs, let's say in a state like Alaska, but there are other options for, you know, maybe some of these folks where there's 5.5 plus billion in there, and there's not enough money in the program, in the middle mile program anyway, from that perspective. So the middle mile program, these applications were made directly by internet service providers. So this is not going through the states. The internet service providers are applying for this directly, and then they get the money directly to do this. The BEAD program, those monies will be granted to the states, and then the states will look at applications for various things that they need within that state, and they'll be doling out the money on that. The volume of applications we received demonstrates the high demand for increasing middle mile capacity throughout the country. That is, who's that? Yeah, Alan Davidson, Assistant Secretary of Commerce. He's the one who's over the NTIA broadband stuff, these programs. NTIA will evaluate the applications and make awards on a rolling basis no earlier than March 2023. So it's still not going to be right away. So they've got to get these applications in, evaluate them, figure out, out of this 5.5 billion plus in funds that people are wanting, how do we take that 1 billion and allocate it? So they've got to do that part. But this does not have any requirement as far as broadband maps and which specific areas are unserved and underserved. So that information, I don't believe, needs to be in yet. Although actually by that point, we'll have, maybe that's why they gave it the March date actually, is because at that point, around March, I think there'll be good data coming in. We'll have the first broadband map out sometime in late November, and then we've already got a bulk challenge process going on the broadband fabric. So that process is going on the broadband fabric, and then the new map, not the new map, the new fabric will come out in the beginning of the year, like around January. And service providers will once again have to upload their information in that broadband fabric as to which areas, which addresses in that fabric they actually serve and what speeds, those kinds of things. So that second round, so the challenges will be done. And that'll produce a new broadband fabric. Then the service providers will start uploading their data to overlay on top of that, their actual data where they can provide service. And then that's going to be received, and sometime like maybe 3 months later, the FCC will put out a new broadband map, but the data will be received. So maybe the NTIA actually will be looking at that data and saying, okay, well, let's see which areas are unserved and underserved as far as pockets of areas, and which middle mile programs will work best with those, because that's really what they're trying to accomplish. It's not just going to be for a middle mile network in the middle of an area where there's other middle mile networks and there's broadband's pretty good. I mean, this is meant to try to connect these unserved and underserved communities to provide additional options for middle mile network if it's not there, or if there is something there, or if it's not there, obviously middle mile networks to connect some of these diverse areas. So very possible, maybe that's why they have the March date, is to look at the applications and get a better sense once the new fabric is out and service providers have uploaded their information as to where really is unserved and underserved. Additionally, the NTIA has temporarily waived the application deadline for eligible entities that submit middle mile grant program applications for projects that would deploy middle mile infrastructure in Puerto Rico, as well as parts of Florida, South Carolina, and Alaska impacted by natural disasters. So obviously those are the recent hurricanes, most recently Ian, that hit Florida and South Carolina. Deadline for such applications is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, November 1st, 2022. So they've got a little less than a month now. Eligible entities that intend to file applications that rely on this waiver are requested to email notice to middlemile@ntia.gov. So if you're in one of these states and you kind of got impacted by the hurricane, didn't get a chance to get it in, the deadline was September 30th, then you have an opportunity to get an extension on that. So you can just email that. So something that's related as far as middle mile, NTIA, which again, this is the agency that's doling out the money. They seek Buy American waivers for the 1 billion middle mile grant program. So this is something that's in the program that has requirements for buying American. And again, this is the agency that makes the decision in a way, at least not really. It's really the Department of Commerce that has to make the decision, but the NTIA is under that department. So the NTIA wants to let broadband grant winners from 2 key programs sidestep Buy American requirements currently tied to the money. The proposal submitted to the Department of Commerce last month. The NTIA sought waivers for its 1 billion middle mile grant program and 268 million connecting minority communities pilot programs. However, it does not yet appear to have submitted any waiver requests for the much larger 42.5 billion BEAD program. And the BEAD program is one that's going to be delayed quite a bit because of the fact that it does require that we know where the unserved and underserved areas are. So the construction of these networks is going to be taking a lot longer. So maybe they're thinking we can wait on that, because one of the issues we have, we've got supply chain issues. We've got to get, there's probably companies right now that are beefing up their manufacturing and maybe seeing how they can manufacture stuff maybe in the United States, maybe to meet this Buy American need. So could be that they won't need to do that for BEAD. Maybe things will improve by then. But right now they're seeing that this money for middle mile and this other program, this Connecting Minority Communities pilot program, that could be needed sooner. So they may be looking at that for being the reason they were looking for the waiver on those 2 programs right now. The Buy American requirements in question would force awardees to use products and materials that contain at least 55% domestic content. For months, telecom industry players have been petitioning the NTIA to waive those rules, arguing that they're impossible to meet and will slow broadband deployments. That's true. Though their requests have been primarily focused on the BEAD program, it does appear that the NTIA is listening. NTIA said in its middle mile waiver proposal that a joint assessment conducted with the Department of Commerce found that Buy American requirements would have a particularly significant impact on the program. Specifically, it found a large portion of middle mile network equipment is produced outside of the U.S., and there are only limited options available to meet Buy American requirements. Other materials, including fiber optics and semiconductors, are also not available in the quantity or quality needed. The Department of Commerce's initial assessment indicates that industry will not be able to address shortages of the manufactured products and construction materials required for middle mile network deployment within the timeframes required by the MMG program. So again, there's the timeframes involved. It also mentions that a lot of the middle mile equipment is not made here, but I think a lot of that might impact the last mile kinds of stuff too, especially the semiconductors and fiber optics. Let's see, NTIA wrote in the filing, that's what they wrote in the filing, okay. It proposed a waiver covering broadband routing and switching equipment, microwave backhaul gear, optical fiber transport equipment, optical line terminals, undersea cable systems, field test gear, and telemetry switches. The waiver would last for 12 months from March 1, 2023 to March 1, 2024. And you can see here that that March timeframe again is when they're looking at awarding these first funds. So that would be right in sync with that. And those covered by the waiver would have to report the purchase of equipment from foreign sources. Department of Commerce is accepting comments on the proposed waiver through the end of the day on Monday, October 3rd. That would have been yesterday, the day before. It's today, the 5th. Like B, the middle mile, no, Monday. 2 days ago. Like B, the middle mile grant program was created by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, but NTIA also sought a 6-month waiver of the Buy American requirements for the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program, which was created as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. So that passed back at the end of 2021 as part of the coronavirus package. Specifically, it requested a general applicability waiver for all iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials, with the exception of fiber optic glass and fiber optic cables used in infrastructure projects funded through the program. As in the middle mile proposal, NTIA said those covered by the waiver would be required to report the purchase of items from foreign sources. Comments on that proposal are also being accepted through October 3rd, which again was a couple of days ago. So, and this story came out on October 3rd. So obviously there was some news from the NTIA on this prior to this. And just to look at what's in the Notice of Funding Opportunity in the NOFO, this is straight out of the middle mile program as far as the Buy American clauses. So it says all funds made available through MMG program, that's the middle mile grant program, for broadband infrastructure must comply with the Build America, Buy America Act. Build America, Buy America Act requires that all of the iron, steel, manufactured products, including but not limited to fiber optic communications facilities, and construction materials used in the project or other eligible activities are produced in the U.S. unless a waiver is granted. The Secretary of Commerce may, and that's Gina Raimondo, may waive the application of this preference when 1, applying the domestic content procurement preference would be inconsistent with the public interest. 2, types of iron, steel, manufactured products, or construction materials are not produced in the U.S. in sufficient and reasonably available quantities or with satisfactory quality. Or 3, the inclusion of iron, steel, manufactured or construction project or construction materials produced in the U.S. will increase the cost of the overall project or other eligible activities by more than 25%. Consistent with the waiver principles detailed in that section of this, probably NOFO here, or it could be of the Build America thing, of that act, and the Buy America guidance, the Secretary will seek to minimize waivers, and any waivers will be limited in duration and scope. So as you can see, the Assistant Secretary, probably Alan Davidson, is submitting this up the chain in the Department of Commerce. So again, Secretary Raimondo will be looking at this, and I'm assuming this is going to be granted, since this is not like an association. Associations have already chimed in, and service providers have already chimed in on needing a waiver for this. Now the NTIA is backing that. And I'm assuming that's going to be granted with the fact that this is coming from the NTIA, the actual agency that's going to be releasing these funds. But again, it needs to go up the chain to the head of the Department of Commerce, the secretary there. So I would expect that we'll be seeing that waiver. They were receiving comments up until Monday, and I think pretty quickly we'll hear that there'll be some kind of waiver related to that. So. Thanks for joining me today for Broadband Deployment News. If this was interesting or helpful, give me a thumbs up if you would on the video, and click subscribe and click the little bell to be notified when I'm live. I appreciate your watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.